All right, hi everyone. I'm Matt, Director of Growth Marketing at Tilting Point. Today we're going to be talking about data or intuition. I think it's a topic that a lot of growth marketers talk about quite a bit. And I have four wonderful experts with me here. I have Brian from Jam City, Sara from Zillow, Tim from Homesnap, and Sid from Aarki. So would like to welcome the panel. And format for today, going to start off with some brief introductions for each member. We're going to go through some questions on data and intuition, and then want to leave some time for a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, keep them in your back pocket and feel free to ask them to the panel at the end of the session. So to start off, each one of you guys could just give a brief introduction and maybe talk about what you're most looking forward for this summer.
Yes, I'll start. I'm Brian Sapp. I oversee UA marketing at Jam City. Jam City is one of the leading casual mobile game developers. We have games like Cookie Jam, Panda Pop. About 6 weeks ago, we launched Harry Potter, Hogwarts Mystery. What I'm most looking forward to, probably World Cup.
Nice.
Super excited. It's probably my favorite sporting event.
Any country?
No, well, the U.S. didn't make it, so no, I wouldn't say at this point I root for any country.
Awesome. All right, looking forward to it, but not anyone in particular.
Yeah, just good soccer.
Hi, I'm Sara Buzak. I work in product marketing for Zillow, which is a real estate marketplace where we connect home seekers looking to buy and rent with professionals, agents, mortgage lenders, landlords, and help you find your home. And specifically, I focus on our mobile app product there. And this summer, I'm most looking forward to my trip to Greece, which is in about 2 weeks. So I'm very excited to be warm.
Nice.
Hi, I'm Tim Condon. I oversee marketing and engagement for Homesnap. Homesnap is, in some respects, similar to Zillow over here. We do have a consumer-facing app, but our primary business model is to be an agent tool. So we are a tool for an agent to use to work with their home buyers and home sellers to buy and sell their homes. And most looking forward to the summer, I guess, honestly, just the kids not being in school so I can have time in the morning to myself.
Perfect.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sid Bhatt, co-founder and CEO of Aarki. We're a mobile DSP. We're one of the top DSPs out there. We help companies with growth and reactivation, re-engagement. Where we're different is we focus a lot on creative personalization, serving relevant creative to users. And we're working with both gaming and non-gaming developers. What I'm looking forward to this summer is taking my daughter, 3-year-old daughter, to Disney World.
Oh, very nice. Cool. Well, now that we got sports and some trips coming up, let's talk marketing. So I think most of us as digital marketers and growth hackers, we spend a lot of our time looking at data. But I want to start off today getting an idea of what's an area of your life outside of marketing that you've turned over to data.
I can jump in. So I used to work down in DC, and I lived in Columbia, Maryland, which is about an hour and 15 commute. And so I literally had to figure out which transportation method was best, whether I'd drive, whether I would take the train, whether I'd bus. And I literally would time every single day, and I knew right down to there were 6 seconds from when you got the hand up on the crosswalk until you actually could still get across. And so I literally had every single route mapped out, and it turned out driving was the best.
Unfortunately.
Yes, unfortunately.
I'll give an example.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, for me, I think one is investing in finances. So when I was younger, my parents were great and got me some very small amounts of stock in certain companies that were fun as a kid, right? Like Disney, things like that. And I have learned through all of my experience that in general, just have to go with the market and data, and whenever I choose myself, I always choose incorrectly. So, so I've just left that outside of any personal bias there, and just use data for any of my investing.
So I guess kind of on that note, in your role as a marketer, I know you said that in your financial investing decision making, you trust the numbers now, but As a marketer, what percentage of your decision making would you say is completely data driven at this point?
You know, I think there's always some element that comes in that's not data driven. So I feel like everything has some element of, does this logically make sense? What do I know about the larger situation? Not because the data is wrong, but because it's often incomplete. And so I feel like there always has to come in at least a check of, does this seem logical? And so I would say everything has a little bit of that. But we're a very data-driven company, so data is always a huge piece of all of the decision-making as well.
Yeah, I think for us, you know, I was trying to think through what part of our role as a marketing organization that's performance marketing based is not data-driven, and I couldn't really think of anything.
Yeah.
Of course, there are some things, but really we are very data-driven. I think where we would not be data-driven is when we think the data is wrong, right? Broken.
For sure.
And then it's like a question of like, is it fraud, or is it the tools, is it the tech? But pretty much every decision we make is very, very data-driven.
When it comes to working with creative, which sometimes is an aspect of performance marketing that people still want to maybe shy away from the data side and say, oh, I have this great idea, this is going to work. You know, how's that relationship working with creatives and data? And is it a bit of a chicken and the egg type of scenario where is it the data leading the creative, or is the creative really leading the decision making and driving the value for the app?
You know, we're still pretty early on, and so we're still figuring a lot of stuff out, and we are very data-driven. But so recently we relaunched our point of sale page. So we sell to agents. We give them the power to take their listings and market them on Google, Facebook, and other platforms. And we went from a single product point of sale to a multi-product point of sale, and we just had no data, right? So we literally had to launch it, roll it out, watch conversion, and then, you know, the creatives never want to believe that there's something wrong. And so we actually literally just brought in agent after agent and like videotaped them on the point of sale screen. It wasn't real data, but it got through to them that like, oh, there were some points where agents are, like they needed to feel the customer, not see the data.
Was there a time period where you had creative that maybe the data didn't look maybe super strong to begin with, but you stuck with your gut and maybe iterated on it and made it better?
Yeah, so you know, in that example, our data was also messy, right? And so our chief product officer was adamant that the data was suggesting that things were really well, and you know, sort of like, I don't know, and the compromise was like, bring people, it doesn't really matter, bring people in, right? We've got the starting point now, bring people in, let them, you know, let's look at what they say and just figure out a solution, and just forget about like the past and whether the data is apples to oranges or apples to apples, and just, you know, let this be the starting point, and let's just try to improve, because it was a debate you couldn't win in that situation.
So I think in at least in mobile gaming, like creative is so important, right? We're trying to sell, we're trying to get users into a game, and hopefully getting them to purchase, right? And we have a lot of mobile gaming companies at scale. So what tends to happen in the mobile gaming industry, I feel like, is that, you know, everybody looks to everybody else for inspiration, right? And it stands to reason that, yes, of course, if someone's spending millions of dollars on a creative, it's probably working. And we have tools like App Annie, Sensor Tower to pull in those creatives. But the result of that is that basically you have a bunch of 6-year-olds chasing a soccer ball, right? And so eventually that creative starts to fatigue. Everybody starts doing the same thing. And that's where I think kind of removing yourself from the data and looking for inspiration from creative minds in completely different concepts is really important. So you kind of need to do like what we call almost like a 75-25 rule. 75% on what's working, iterating that creative, getting incremental lift, but then 25% on concepts that are just out there that might completely move the needle in a different way that you wouldn't expect. So I think you need to balance both, because if you don't, you're going to end up just finely tuning the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, I guess if you only follow the data in that scenario, you're just going to be, you know, being part of the herd instead of kind of standing out and doing something innovative. So I guess that's from a creative standpoint where the intuition side still comes into play, and you really need to rely on you know, your own gut and market research on driving creative for your app. Mm-hmm. Awesome. So Sid, I know you guys do a lot. You know, obviously that's very data heavy. So for you, can you give an example of a time period where you kind of maybe went against your gut, or you went against the data that you had, and you ended up making a decision that ended up being a win for you?
We never do that. It doesn't work.
That's the right answer.
To Brian's point, like we do something similar. We call it champion challenger iteration. So I think most of the marketers here know that creatives burn out very, very quickly. So I can give a specific example of like we do a lot with slots games. So start off with like 777s, right? That's your basic, and then you have these rich media animated ads, and they kind of spin, and then you kind of add. Next step would be to add. You bring on a challenger that adds on like rubies and emeralds, right? And then from there, you could add on multipliers like 2x or 5x or 10x multipliers. And you kind of see the performance of the, we'll call it install rate, which is click-through and conversion combined. We also look at ROI. And then the data continues to drive that. So it's a constant cycle of champion, challenger, and then the challenger becomes a champion. So we allocate not maybe 25%, but something like 10% of our inventory to a challenger. And if it outperforms a champion, it gets the majority of the volume from there.
Awesome. And for that kind of A/B testing framework, I want to talk a little bit about the stack that we use to really drive these data-driven results. Is that a native built tool? Do you use third-party tools for your A/B testing? What's kind of the tech behind your decision making?
So we have a studio. It's a web-based creative studio. So those in the room that have used DoubleClick Bid Manager, they have a studio. There's Sultra. There's tools out there that allow you to build HTML5 creative. So we have our own. It's called Aarki Studio, and it's a full stack ad server and a A/B testing framework for testing creative.
Oh, very cool. Anybody else use any interesting technology to kind of drive data-driven decisions?
Well, let me think about that. We are working on some cool stuff. So like we have multivariate A/B testing for level tuning that we're going to start repurposing for creative.
Interesting.
But right now we largely rely on the platforms that we advertise on to run the creative tests. And we don't have any in-house technology that does it yet, but we're working on it.
Very cool. So I think, as you mentioned, you kind of said yet, right? Like there's a lot of visions I think people have for how we can better integrate data into performance marketing and kind of marketing and mobile in general. So when you're thinking about hiring from your marketing team, how important is it for that person to have a background in data and technology versus traditional marketing experience?
Yeah, I think they're both really important, and everything that we do is data-driven, and so being comfortable with data and being able to understand how to interpret it is really important. I think that one of the things that I love is that we have a whole analytics team to support all of us, so it's not that everyone needs to be able to pull SQL queries or do all the analysis, but what you need to be able to do is feel comfortable with the numbers and ask the right questions, because I think that's a huge piece of, we're almost in this world where we have too much data and so many numbers to look at that you have to know what are the strategic questions to ask and what should you be thinking about. And if you can direct it in the right way, then you can get to the answers you need, versus otherwise it can be kind of overwhelming and you don't know what conclusions to make from it. So I think that piece of critical thinking and being comfortable with data is what I look for.
How do you go about organizing that structure for where you're going to explore first within all the data that you have?
Yeah, I think it's taking a step back and thinking about always going back to the consumer and what's our larger goal for what are we trying to accomplish for them, and either within this product or within this ad campaign, and then starting from there to think through what those questions are. And then obviously when you get into it, then that always ends up leading to more questions and kind of end up iterating based on that.
We do for certain positions, I do like a little mini case, actually two different little cases, right? And I sort of hand over a sheet of data, and it's really simplistic. It's just an email funnel, right? But my goal is to see, like, do they know, like, do they freeze up right when they see the data, or do they sort of like just go through methodically and calculate? And then, so the first one's very simple. Like if they just do the math, and I would say like put out your calculator, like in real life, like you have calculators, so this is not like a test of your knowledge. Honestly, like almost half of the people don't. They try to do it in their head, and it's sort of silly, right? And they get it wrong. And then I hand them another sheet, and this sheet got like a ton of data on it. And if they just take a second to look at it, they'll see that there's like one time series of data that just like falls off a cliff, right? And I'm just looking for them, like, can they take that step back and see like almost like the untied shoelace, right? Like it's not that there's like they have to do all the math, and if they do the math, they'll figure it out. But there's sort of too many numbers to do that. They just need to be able to like feel that there's something wrong here, right? And it's sort of like the art of the analysis, not just the science. So it's really helpful. I mean, you really get to see how many people are just like very literal versus like able to step back and really understand like, oh, I see what's going on here.
So if any of you are interviewing with Tim,
yes,
you know exactly.
I just gave it away.
Yeah, I think like for our hiring, we do kind of similar thing, and I think both you guys hit on it. Is like one, data is super important, so we give Excel tests and we'll put mistakes in there, see if people catch it,
Ooh, I
right?
like that.
Because it happens in real life. Like data breaks all the time, and you need people to catch it. And then two, you know, we look. And I think you were kind of alluding to this. We look for people who are intellectually curious. Like to me, that's like the biggest motivation for a good employee, especially in a data-driven world, because there are people who are good with data, but they also like, are they going to dig deeper for when they find a problem or when something's good, right? Because you can never take anything at face value. If something's working, you need to figure out why. Dig into like what country that is, what device, what ad, you know, and so. You see the differences between, especially when you have like large teams, people with intellectual curiosity versus people who don't have it. And like that intellectual curiosity brings a ton of value because they're just finding all these little like gold nuggets that you can use.
And do you find that if someone's lacking the intellectual curiosity or the strong data background, that's harder to teach than marketing?
Yeah. I mean, I think in the performance marketing, yes. It's probably a little bit easier to teach the marketing side. But again, I think it's more like that quantity of the intellectual curiosity. You either have it or you don't. I would say it's not even teachable. Yeah. Right? You just want to find people with it. Like I think there's people who don't have finance backgrounds that actually I've worked with that come from like English majors, art majors, but they have that like need to dig into like why something's working. And I take that person over like someone who's got like the hard skill set, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally agree.
Cool. So talking a little bit more about, I think kind of on that topic of people with the more technological backgrounds and how this is kind of playing out in a future of user acquisition and growth marketing that's more automation focused. You know, how important is it for you guys as people who work in marketing to stay up to date on your more tech-driven and data-driven skills, and how do you see that playing into the future of kind of growth marketing roles?
Well, I can start. So I sort of described that we power these ads for our agents, and when we first started, we had this really super slick front end, and the agent comes in, it's a couple clicks, and everything just dumped into our CRM, and literally like by hand, we were like entering these ads into Facebook, and so we knew that the power editor tool so intimately well because we were doing it over and over and over again. And now at this point, it's completely automated. You know, we're tapped into all the APIs, and I actually feel like a little uncomfortable that like we don't know all the levers that we could be pulling to make these better because it's we're not in the tools every day, and so it actually feels a little uncomfortable to automate that to that level where you actually don't know like exactly what's happening at every moment.
I think when Google released Google Universal App Campaign, like I'm in like a lot of UA groups, and like the chatter was like, "Can you believe this? Like they're not letting us, optimize by keyword or optimize by platform." And like the pushback was like huge for like a year. And but I think Google understood that technology is going to win when you have so many variables, right? So many like levers to pull. How can you possibly like do it better as a human and scale? And now like, you see Google UAC is like one of the top performers for many, many companies. And so I think it's kind of inevitable on a long enough timeline that more and more technology comes out that does that across platforms. It's stuff we're looking at, and the machine's always going to be able to do it better eventually.
So where I see things going, obviously they're from the marketing side, client side, we're on the tech side. We're seeing the walled garden approach of Facebook, right? And then there's the programmatic approach. On the programmatic side, as similar to Google, there's less focus now on like publisher level optimization, where a marketer says, well, that publisher isn't performing, blacklist them, or that inventory. It's more about user profiles these days, where there's more automation, machine learning to identify and find those good users. So every publisher has good users, some might have more than others. But rather than blacklisting publishers, the focus now is on more automated profiling and more automated post-install KPI optimization. So like in the case of Zillow, it might be cost per renter or cost per lead, I guess, somebody who says, I'm interested in that house. Or for Jam City, it might be just ROI, straight up ROI. And how do you optimize towards that down funnel metric with as less sort of controls as possible and letting the machine do the work? I think that's the future.
So would you recommend that people don't even blacklist anymore and just focus on kind of those machine-driven ROI optimizations?
I think that's where things are going. I think a lot of the platforms are removing that layer of control. And I think outside of major issues like fraud continues to be an issue in the space, if you see that where certain publishers are clearly driving unwanted inventory sources, then that's how you'd optimize.
So I know you're kind of talking a bit about UAC. Do you guys think that media buying platforms outside of, let's say, UAC, Facebook, and maybe programmatic, things that are kind of more data-driven and less traditional UA, are going to survive the end of the decade?
Wait, like
a year and a half. Yeah, 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
So what platforms would that be? Like,
So like a traditional video network, or kind of affiliate marketing, things that are not necessarily as data-driven as
I think it's going to be tougher and tougher for them. I mean, the fact is, like, Facebook's coming into third-party publishing, or not third-party publishing, but basically becoming audience network, right?
Sure.
Google, same thing. They just released rewarded video. So it's definitely going to get tougher and tougher over time. 2 years, they'll probably be around because they're making money right now. So maybe 5 years? I don't know.
Yeah, I'd go
10 years? I don't know. It's tough to say, but I think it's going to get tougher.
Well, so the marketers are wanting ROI, right? So
Yeah.
proof is on the stage.
Yeah, as long as
and affiliates, I don't think, are able to optimize towards an ROI goal, post-install goal. And so I think that's going to be a difficult space for them.
But there's still a lot of unsophisticated buyers out there. I mean, our whole business is based on unsophisticated buyers, right? Real estate agents don't have the time and energy to figure it all out, and they even with tools like USA, they won't do it, right? They need somebody to sort of pull that lever for them. So there's a lot of money, that's being sold in unsophisticated ways. So I think time horizon is probably 10 years at least.
Interesting. So kind of preparing though for that tech-driven future, it sounds like we're going to be putting a lot of our eggs in a few baskets, right? Those companies that really drive the programmatic buying, the ROI-driven buying. Obviously without going into too much detail, what type of technology do you guys want to build in-house to kind of drive that data-driven future of UA?
A lot. I mean, listen, it comes down to like everything, right? Like great predictive LTV models. We were talking about this before we came out here, but our games are monetizing 3 to 4 years in. We would love to have models, and we have some now, but we would love to have better like models that just predict out, what the user is going to be worth 3 to 4 years from now. Taking into account the market's going to change, the game's going to change, it's a lot of variables. Obviously, moving budget around is another thing we're looking at that comes to like machine learning can probably do it better than a human based on real time across our portfolio. So we have 8 or 9 games we're running at scale, and looking at those games in real time based on what's going to make Jam City the most money. There's no reason why a machine couldn't probably do it better than me doing it with spreadsheets, right? And then, like I said, multivariate testing on creative. There's a lot that we're looking at that's like really interesting.
Yeah, I think a big focus on the retargeting aspect because we can utilize our own data there. And so that's an area where I feel like we can really focus in-house a lot on what we already know about our users, what homes they like, where they're searching, things like that, to really take advantage of that in terms of any of our advertising and user acquisition or reacquisition at that point. And so I think that's an area that we're very focused on in terms of just really, and not just in UA, really in all aspects of our business, how can we understand consumer needs more so and understand each consumer and personalize their experience.
And as someone who's kind of more on the product marketing side, and how do you see the technology kind of playing into also improving, conversion optimization and other things within the product?
Yeah, I think it's a huge piece of it, and I think the biggest part is how can we figure out what the right timing and the right messages for every user, so that in terms of acquisition, but also in terms of when you're in the product, for us, when we think about home buying, it's actually kind of a long life cycle. You're usually looking for several months. And when you're looking initially, maybe you're dreaming and want something very different than when you're about to close on a house. And so understanding that about your users and being able to use what we know about them to give them the right messaging and the right product at the right time is really important in building out those kind of recommendations and technology to support that.
So sort of like, you're looking at this, but you probably really want this.
Yeah, and we actually just, we've been sending recently new push notifications. There are recommendations based exactly on that. So we know what you've been looking at, what you're interested in. So have you seen also this other home that's
20% cheaper because you really probably can't afford it.
Yeah, everyone's budgets start to creep up a little as they see what's available.
So kind of on the topic of using data in the future, I'm going to ask a question which I didn't prepare you guys for. GDPR and e-privacy. How do you think that and kind of the evolution of data protection is going to impact the ability to build out these tools and tech that we want to use to pretty much automate marketing?
Well, one, I think GDPR is a good thing for consumers. The data and how we use the data has basically been a black box. And no one really reads the terms of service, right? And the terms of service never really said a lot. But I think GDPR is going to be a good thing for consumers. I think as consumers, I think it's all part of data education, right? The media has been overblowing a lot of stuff, and I think that's part of because people are uneducated, right? So I think it's going to take years for people to understand how their data is being used. But once they do, I think they'll understand that the value is actually there for most people. Because what you're talking about with your product, we know Target does this very well, and a lot of companies do this very well, is building these customer profiles and then anticipating their needs. And I think most of the younger generation gets that, right? Because we're kind of used to it. And I say we, but I'm probably the older generation. But I think as this digital age kind of matures, I think people will be making conscious decisions to be a part of that marketing machine. Naturally, from the flip side of that, if people want to be outside of it, we got to make sure we have the tools in place to remove them. That person is wiped. That person doesn't exist anymore.
And as a company that obviously in the gaming space, we benefit from having a lot of data on our users. Do we have a responsibility in driving that education as well?
That's a good question. I think we have a responsibility to be transparent. I think the education will just be driven by the media, to be honest, plus the big platforms, right? Like Facebook, Google.
Sure.
And I think at the end of the day, GDPR will actually help Facebook and Google more than anybody else. And to some extent, it will hurt some of the smaller guys. But I think that's just the natural way of it.
I think GDPR is, it's still confusing to a lot of people. I'm sure if you do a survey of people in the room, you'll get different answers on what people think it is. So I think it's been around for 2 years and conversations have been going around, but there was a hard cutoff in May. And We certainly see that there is different interpretations of GDPR because we work with the exchanges, we work with the advertisers, we work with the attribution partners, and they've all implemented a different version of GDPR based on what their lawyers have told them should be done. So there's a lot of confusion in the space, and sometimes we see that marketing activity takes a pause until they kind of get their head around it. So I think it's a good thing for the customers, but I don't think all the app developers out there are implementing it in the way that they should be, and I think everyone's kind of implementing their own interpretation. So, yeah.
It's a guideline without a rule book, right? It's everyone has their own way of playing. Cool. So I want to pull this back a little bit. Sorry for getting you guys on the GDPR topic, but wanted to pull it back a little bit and talk a little bit more about the main topic, which is data versus intuition, and want to understand a little bit more about how you guys organize your data and kind of what that structure looks like for making decisions, whether it be product decisions, creative decisions. What are the metrics that you guys are looking at? Who's part of that decision? How does that go?
Yeah, I think for us, one big piece of it is I think the biggest piece for any data analysis is going into it ahead of time with what are your goals and what would success look like, rather than, and I think this was talked about a little bit in earlier panels too, rather than retroactively in the A/B testing panel, retroactively going back and saying, oh, now I see something from this based on what I kind of want to see. And so for us, it's all about kind of how do we get all of our data as much as we can in one place, which can be really challenging across multiple platforms, but to really see that kind of full picture. So we try not to focus on any one metric exclusively at the expense of the others, because there's what we've found is there's not really one perfect metric. Even if you go most downstream to a conversion, there's still, you want to make sure that the overall experience for the user is positive. And so we look at a lot of different metrics in combination to understand, to try and get at, is that a better user experience for the user? And is this actually more effective? And then based on that, do we want to keep moving forward or go in a different direction? And so it's never kind of one metric driven, rather more nuanced look at kind of all of our main metrics.
So in a way, you're using intuition to figure out how to parse the data.
That's true.
Perfect.
We went through it. So I said we're still pretty early on. So we were, flying a little bit of seat of our pants in the past 2 years, and we went through an exercise early this year to figure out what are because we were looking at sort of lots of data, but sort of like you were just saying, like when you sort of look at too much, you then sort of don't have anything to look at. And so we made a decision on we have 6 core metrics. Half of them are like core like app engagement, and then half of them are revenue generating engagement. And then now we just track them. We use Domo as our tool to power it. And it's really nice. It's just that now it's just a dashboard, and we look at it on a regular basis, and we're tracking to our goals. And it makes things a lot cleaner, because then when you're sort of deciding on what to do, and you can always look back and say, does it push one of these goals? And if it doesn't, it sort of falls by the wayside.
Yeah, I'll just. So our tool set is, we have attribution SDK, we have an internal SDK we pull into Teradata, which is where we store our data, and then we have MapD and Tableau dashboards. So that's kind of a data funnel. And I would say from like a high level, what I care about most is like how the portfolio is doing, and it's basically, if you think about it, each game is like an annuity, right? I'm investing money into it now, like how much is coming back over time. And so like a lot of my high level dashboards just look at that across the portfolio. And then from there, like each game is, like each UA manager on each game is focused on return on ad spend, and we have goals against that. And then on the creative side, it's like OCVR is our kind of golden metric, which is impression to install. But then when we have a creative team that just focuses on making creatives better, and they're obviously looking at CTR, CVR, and return on ad spend. But OCVR is kind of like our holy grail metric.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think every company uses a different phrase for OCV.
Yeah, no, they do. I think I've heard IPM, a couple others, yeah.
IPM, INR, OCVR. Yeah, I find it fascinating how, 4 different companies that are all optimizing for the same objective, which is ROI, all in the mobile space. The tech stack could be so different. The way that you're looking at data could be so different. So kind of what's one area that you think that is unique and specific to what you guys do on the data front that you think is kind of not an innovation that you guys do, but something that differentiates you from other growth marketing teams out there?
Well, I'll throw out. I mean, because we make it agent available to market their listings or their sales. The two metrics we track really closely are how many opportunities are in the marketplace. So that to us means this agent is a user in Homesnap and they have 10 situations this year that they could turn to an ad, right? And so we actually look at how many of those opportunities exist out there, and then we look at what our conversion rate is on those opportunities. And so we're always trying to acquire users that have more opportunities, right? And so we can up our number of opportunities, and then obviously trying to optimize that conversion rate, because we sort of know the universe of our opportunities, and we also know the universe of the agents who aren't even registered yet. So we are like, oh, that guy's got a lot of opportunities. Let's get him on the platform so we can hopefully get him to start advertising with us.
In our business, it's identifying like higher level features versus lower level features. So an example would be for casual games, there are certain features that are predictive of a good user, but they're going to be the same no matter who the advertiser is, whether it's Jam City or King. So identifying similar features that might be universally predictive for hardcore games or some non-gaming categories. And I think that's where the data challenge is big for the amount of data we're collecting. The companies you mentioned earlier, the video networks, they've all adopted programmatic, and they're all SSPs at this stage. Their entire inventory is available programmatically. Every single company out there, from AdColony to Unity to Chartboost, AppLovin, they're all programmatically enabled. So you're in a situation where you have the auction bid stream coming in is 1 million auctions a second that you're capturing, and you kind of have this layer of data engineering that is focused on identifying these features that can predict good users by genre and then by advertiser. And I mean not just predicting an install, but actually like the post-install KPI that's important. And then once you get the click and the performance, then you have another layer of data engineering, which is like how do you access the new, Redshift, for example, where or using SQL or Postgres to then look at the performance that are important, like conversion rate, CTR. So there's that separation of data and the data science that goes behind managing data that is sort of pre-click or pre-install versus after the fact. And that creates a whole level of sophistication. Another example that is interesting when you think about what can actually predict a good user is what we found recently is when users go play games and they are in a store to purchase something, so let's say they want to buy some coins in your game, a lot of people actually exit out for some reason, like they don't want to spend the $2 or $10, whatever it is. And as game developers, some of them actually capture how many people are exiting the purchase funnel inside the game. We actually found that using that as a predictor, it's actually a very strong predictor to future purchasers when you do lookalike models. So that's kind of going back to my point about the type of data you would use for model building and development at the data science level, where models are being built by genre of advertiser versus the analysts that are running campaigns that are doing sort of like funnel optimization. And
cool. Awesome. Well, that's all the time we have for the panelists today, but I wanted to open it up to some Q&A. If anyone has a question, please wait for the microphone, though, to come over so we can hear you. Any questions for any of our panelists? Over here. We have one over here.
Hi. Is there a danger as you become more data heavy that the data stack becomes so complicated that like you start to lose like the signal from the noise, and then subsequently like as you scale up, you have new hires, like obviously finding people who have that intimate knowledge of your data becomes harder and harder. Like how do you guys scale that up on the data side?
So I literally got an email last night from somebody on our team, and she's been here about a year. She said, oh, by the way, we made this change. And I looked at it, I was like, oh, God, that change will affect so many different spots, right? And it was exactly that problem, which is like, you bring people on, they make changes. Fortunately, she brought it up, but like, we've definitely had situations where we're like, what's going on here? And you realize somebody made a change, didn't realize how it affects data downstream, and then you've sort of lost a bunch of, or you've, even worse, like made decisions based on data that you thought was right and it's not. Which is why I go back to the like, you need to find people who can look at data and realize like, something just doesn't look right here, right? And do the investigation. Yeah, that's a big problem.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, I think, I don't know any company where data's not messy. Like, data's always messy, data's hard. I think the difference is that I've seen is when you have experienced leadership who scaled data before, they understand, one, most startups, like, it's gonna be messy, it's gonna be shit show, basically. And like someone, as a startup grows, someone's gonna have to come in and kind of fix it eventually. And usually that whoever they bring in to fix it is gonna be hopefully an experienced leader who can fix it and then scale the company, which is the right balance of like having the right infrastructure, but then being able to partner with any new technologies, because we know like every 4 to 5 years there's a new technology, especially around data. And so what I've seen is like the good leaders can balance those two things, but it's usually very messy.
Any other questions? No. Okay. I think we're good then. Cool. Well, thank you guys. Hopefully you learned something.
Thank you.